You're listening to the Sonny Brown Breakdown. Now, it is time to break it down.
Welcome to episode number 3 of the Sonny Brown Breakdown, a podcast where we will discuss the training, teaching, health and education of mixed martial arts. In this episode, I talk to Andy from the School of Grappling, where we discuss his fascinating ideas about teaching and developing intuition and instincts in your grappling training. Now let's go to the podcast. Just give you a bit of background. I came across your stuff, I believe it was on Instagram. I first saw the School of Grappling Instagram account, and I was very intrigued by some of the ideas that you're putting across, some of the posts you're putting up, lots of work you've been putting into researching the statistics of ADCC and MMA, and I thought you had some excellent ideas. And I thought, yeah, it'd be great to get you on, have a chat. And so I'm just wondering, with your School of Grappling page, what's the overall idea that you're trying to impart into people with School of Grappling, and just a bit of your own personal background with grappling and also your education background.
Okay, first of all, what's up, guys? I think I start with my background first. And I will not go too much in depth because I actually think what I'm talking about is way more important and way more interesting than I am. I'm basically just a physicist. I'm a huge nerd. I like to really analyze stuff. Obviously, that's why I did all the statistics. And I have 20 years of grappling experience. It all started with judo. And some of you may know, some of you don't, that in judo the rules changed a lot over the last, maybe 10 to 15 years, and they got more and more restrictive, and competition got more and more specialized. So I felt like a need to go and learn something else. And probably like everybody, I watched the UFC and I saw this whole Gracie story unfold and thought this BJJ seems to be the shit. So I started BJJ, and sadly I really got a bit disappointed because I felt like I went from one specialized thing to another, and because the stuff I learned in BJJ was literally nothing like grappling in MMA at this time. It's like all these rules and so much guard pulling. The gi stuff got weirder and weirder. So I focused more on no-gi grappling because I felt like this is a little bit closer to real grappling, because, like I said, I wanted to go to something which includes more than judo and not from one specialized thing to something different, which is specialized in another direction. So I started more training no-gi and first all the leg lock stuff when it came about, and then I realized that's still not kind of all grappling has to offer, and still doesn't really look at like grappling in MMA at all. So I studied a lot of wrestling, especially folk style wrestling, college wrestling in the USA, and then slowly I felt like, now things get more like grappling. If you include all the stuff from judo, all the stuff from jiu-jitsu, from no-gi jiu-jitsu, and a lot of wrestling, I felt like this is actually what grappling is about. If you combine all the stuff, and this is kind of also what I try to do with my page. I want to move the grappling community a bit more together, because I feel like all the sports specialized in different directions, like judo, gi jiu-jitsu, no-gi jiu-jitsu, submission only, sambo, wrestling, freestyle wrestling, all this stuff. Everybody's specialized, and actually that's a good thing, I feel like, because that's needed if you want progress in a certain direction. But I feel like my role, or what I'm trying to do, is to bring it back together again, to say like, you know what, in the end it's all grappling, and maybe it's fun and we can all learn if we take a look at it all and not just focus on our own stuff. That's like the first thing I try to do with School of Grappling. Also the cultural side and the historical side, because for me, grappling is a sport, obviously, and that's a really important part. Not so much martial arts, like Britt Mickelson also says. I think that's not so important, but it's also really important for culture and stuff like this. I always felt like the Greeks showed how important this kind of sport like grappling or pankration can be for a society. Also, like if you take a look at Mongolia, for example, people just meet in the field and they grapple and they get like huge honors and thousands of watchers and all the stuff. And yeah, that's always interested me, like the cultural side also. And another thing I'm trying to do is obviously all the statistics stuff I do, because I feel like, many coaches or people in jiu-jitsu mostly, but also wrestling and judo, they all show stuff and claim stuff, but actually most of it or some of it really is not supported by evidence at all. And I think smart people already knew this. So for example, a lot of things you see in my statistics, I feel like don't really show new stuff for the smart guys. Proof that they were right, what they felt was anecdotally right at the time. The third part, and maybe the part which is dearest to my heart, is I want to really educate people how to learn grappling or jiu-jitsu, because I feel like grappling evolved so much in the last years, but teaching did not. Feel like the way people coach and teach in jiu-jitsu and judo, especially, not so much in wrestling, I feel like is really not up to date.
Yeah, that's certainly one of the things that's drawn me to your work. And like you mentioned at the start there, that, looking to combine the different grappling arts of judo, wrestling and jiu-jitsu. And I know one thing I've seen you use the hashtag a lot on your Instagram page of wrestle-jitsu, and linking that into how things are being taught in jiu-jitsu. Like to just basically discuss what your current thoughts are on the state of pedagogy used in jiu-jitsu as a whole, and just how you think things are currently being taught, or how it can be improved, and what your thoughts are on this at the moment.
I want to start off with saying I will speak about jiu-jitsu, but I felt like the same is true for judo, especially. Because they're both a sport, but they're still kind of martial artsy. So they didn't make that jump like wrestling and reach the point where it's just a sport, but there's still many components of martial arts. And I feel like that's a bad thing, actually, because I feel like most people or competitors and coaches, they focus too much on techniques, and that's really a modern thing. I feel like there's this misconception that you have to learn just enough or the right techniques, and if you just know more techniques than the other guy or the right ones, then at some point you will become skillful or become a master of your art. And so naturally, coaches who believe this, like, okay, I just have to collect all the techniques that work, and if I know them better than somebody else and I can do them better, then I'm skillful, I'm a master, and I will win lots of competitions or train good people. And yeah, if that's the goal, naturally you will focus on teaching techniques, obviously. And I think that's really bad, because we will reach that point soon. So then some smarter guys, I feel like, especially Ryan Hall, or Rob Biernacki from Island Top Team. They introduced the jiu-jitsu community to concepts and principles. So basically what they are saying is, look, nobody can remember 10,000 techniques, but you don't have to. You just have to know the underlying concepts and principles behind the techniques. And then you can basically just come up with the explicit technique at the time. And I feel like that's a really, really, really big improvement to the first method. And it's a method I also use a lot. I think concepts and principles are really, really important because if you know concepts and principles, you can come up with heuristics or rules of thumb, which help decision making in really complex situations. They're way faster than techniques because you don't really have to think that much. And that's actually how I try to transcend even that, because if you want to remember techniques, you actually have to do a lot of thinking and that's a bad thing because everybody knows fighting or grappling. You have to make decisions really, really fast and you have to multitask and a lot of things are going on. So what concepts, principles, or rules of thumb do, they really, really lower the amount of thinking you have to do or the stuff you have to know. But actually, if you take a look at how really, really good masters of any kind, it can be sports, it can be cooking, can be music, it can be arts, painting, anything. If you take a look at them, you realize most of them don't think at all. They reached a point where they just do stuff intuition with their intuition. And that's actually something I have studied a lot. And I feel like that's what I bring to the table. I say, techniques, sure, they are important, but we shouldn't focus on them at all. And I say concepts and principles, they're also important. They're actually much more important, and they are still a big part of my method. But the end goal should not be to teach techniques or concepts, but to develop a sense of intuition in each student you have. And if that's your goal and you really say, that's the premise I start with, then naturally all your training and all the classes you design look completely different because you have a different goal. And that's basically the starting point of my whole method and why I think most people have it wrong with all this technique stuff.
Okay, that's a fascinating way of looking at it, and I really agree with the end goal being to train people's intuitions, because that's whenever you're going against a good grappler, that's you can tell that they're not thinking, they're just moving. So my question would then be, if we're shifting away from techniques to training concepts and principles to maybe build that intuition, then how do we actually go about working out what these principles are for grappling? Which ones are the ones to teach that we should use? And how do we not just fall into the same trap of technique collection and just transfer that into, say, concept collection, and figuring out which ones are the best to use and how to go about that?
I don't really use concepts and principles that much, and I tell you why. Because I think they are important for some people. For me, for example, I'm a nerd. I like to think about stuff, and for me, concepts and principles help a lot, especially because I'm a physicist. I really, really know all this lever stuff, and that's simple stuff for me, so I can really work with that. But I also came across many students who aren't like that. They just are really good movers. They like to move. They are a lot more embodied. They don't think as much. And actually, I think to attain intuition, you don't need concepts and principles. They can help for some people, but you don't need them. And actually, I think that's if you really think about it, if you think about some, I don't know, football players, basketball players, grapplers, fighters, for me, it always was pretty obvious that they are not that smart, and they really don't understand the concepts. They really don't understand the principles, at least not in an explicit way. But for some reason, they just move so masterfully. They always do the right stuff. But they do it without much thought. And I think a really good example for this is in MMA is Tony Ferguson. I think if you would discuss concepts and principles with him, that wouldn't go that well. But he still always knows what to do in the situation when it arises, and I think that's the point. That's where I want to go. What I want to reach in my students. I want to develop this intuition in everybody. Because I feel like this is literally the highest form of mastery. And another thing I want to talk about is actually everybody is a master. We always think, when we think about mastery, we think about stuff like sports and cooking or craftsmanship. But if you think about the stuff you do every day, most of it is intuition. If you, I don't know, if you cut a cucumber, if you turn the lights on, if you open a door, all the stuff, you don't think about it. You just do it because you experience the stuff so often, and you actually have some sort of you are immersed in a task. It's like this is stuff you need to do it for living, so you naturally are invested. And I think that's something which lacks if you just try to copy techniques and stuff. I don't know if that was a big tangent or not.
No, that explains a lot for me. So you're saying that, we don't necessarily need to explicitly teach concepts to people. Like, they don't need to be able to know to recite the concepts back to us, or the principles. They don't need to be able to write them down, what they are. But we should be teaching in a way that they intuitively pick up those concepts and principles through practice. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. And I think like what's really important for me is I want to get across that there's no dogma. Everything is just a tool. I still use techniques. I still use concepts and principles. And so for example, if you realize some students, they need concepts and principles, then use them, for God's sake. Yeah. And but also you realize that many great athletes really, really work with this stuff because they're just not that kind of a guy, So what you said is absolutely correct. The goal is to develop intuition through exercises. I tried to design because, like, actually, what intuition really is, that's up for debate. Many people believe and that's something I also wrote. It's something like an unconscious heuristic. Or implicit rules of thumb in our body, which we can use without thinking about them. That's more like the stuff of Gerd Gigerenzer I talked about, the psychologist. But there are many people, especially philosophers, who actually believe, intuition is something completely different. It's just then stuff gets really complicated if you look at it from a phenomenological or psychological, philosophical side. But what everybody agrees on is that the only way you get intuition is first-hand experience, stuff you personally experience yourself. And so what most coaches do, I feel like, is they try to teach in a way where they either try to convey their own experiences, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, they want to help their students, obviously. What's even worse is when coaches try to convey stuff they didn't experience themselves. So this is like the Bullshido McDojo style. Like you have a grandmaster, he tells you do X and A and B, and so you just mimic this stuff and teach your students, and they mimic you, and so it's basically a evolution of mimicry over generations. And I think this is actually the worst thing you could do. And what most coaches do, and I do too from time to time, because I fail, is they try to convey their own experiences. And I feel like this is actually wrong. You have to realize that in order for your students to really learn, to really get a grip of something, they just have to experience it themselves. I feel like a really good example is I personally, when I was a child, I really liked to play with dangerous stuff like fire, knives, and so on. Mm-hmm. And my mother always told me, don't do this, be careful, don't play with the knife and stuff like this. And I always felt like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. Until I cut myself really bad. I still have the scar on my left hand. And from this day on, I really was careful with knives because I experienced something myself and I made an error. And obviously, I don't tell every kid should cut himself. But what I'm saying is, if you want to really remember stuff, like really remember stuff, you have to connect it to some perception and action or experience you had yourself at some point in your life. And the more of experiences which are or resemble similar situations, the better you get at those similar situations. Yeah. And I feel like many people now could maybe say, oh yeah, so he's arguing, just roll all the time. And yeah, I think like you can actually maximize the amount of experiences you get in a certain time frame, and that's basically my method.
Okay, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I think it makes sense. Like, you can tell someone that, you better have one arm, both arms in or both arms out when you're in someone's guard, or you're going to be at risk of a triangle choke. You can explain that, but obviously they're going to understand it a lot better if it actually happens to them, and they'll have that deeper understanding, which makes a lot of sense. So then what would your ways of conveying that intuition or helping your students build that intuition, how do you go about doing that?
So for example, there are many ways. I think you could either start by, that's a bit more, if you give more guidance, for example. Let's take something everybody can relate to. Let's say you want to work on back control. Okay. Mm-hmm. So what you could do, you could basically start with the technique, like most coaches do. So you maybe work a certain series of moves. For example, the guy turtles, you get a seat belt, you insert the first hook, you break him down, you insert the second hook, then you trap his arms, and you choke him, right? Mm-hmm. So you show them, you explain maybe the important concepts and stuff, and then you let them. And actually, I feel like this whole repetition thing is really stupid, because either I really work with smart people, but I feel like if I show them a sequence like this, everybody can do it after 3 times, 5 times, 10 times. But there's no need to do it like 100 times. So when I have the feeling like everybody gets the technique, kinda, or the sequence, I say, all right, let's move on. So the next goal would be to say, okay, now everybody has like an idea what to do. They cannot do it perfectly, and they aren't masters at it at all, but they have a goal in mind, and that's really important. So now we start with little mini sparrings or games, like you break it down. So you work certain skills. For example, you tell your students, okay, now you know what the goal is. Let's start with the seat belt, and we do a little game. Just try to get both hooks in. Mm-hmm. So then the people can play with it. A person gets his seat belt, then they play around. I also tell my students kind of regulate the intensity. If you know the guy doesn't get it at all, maybe do a little bit of less resistance. If you feel like he gets the hooks in too easy, do a little bit more resistance. So it's not so much sparring in the sense of fighting. It's more like playing. Mm-hmm. I want people to play around with a certain situation. And maybe they do it like 5 minutes, one guy, 5 minutes, the other guy. And I feel like it's always really, really interesting if you try that yourself, how fast people learn small little details. If they just repeat the task again and again and again, and they fail again, then they try something else. They come up with little details. If I would have shown them all these details in the technique before, they would have been overwhelmed. But this way, they just do it intuitively because they try. So, for example, after that, I would do another game and say, okay, now let's start from back control, and one guy tries to escape, and you just try to hold him there. So no chokes, nothing. So you just work on the control, for example. And then one guy tries to escape. And then what I often tell students, so for example, if you want to work your keeping him in back control, I say, okay, 20 seconds, you go hard on him, don't let him escape. And then after that, give the other person a chance to work his escapes. So then you lower the resistance a little bit so he can get out, but with a lot of struggle. So it shouldn't be easy. And so and then you can progress. Like you train sub skills of a certain skill. You develop a game for it. And at some point, if you feel like people get competent in these parts, in these sub skills, not in the whole sequence, but in a certain sequence, for example, then you start adding the sequences together. So you do the easiest thing would be, okay, goal, you start with seatbelts, your goal is to get a rear naked choke, right? Mm-hmm. So that would be another game. So you don't start in back control, but with a seatbelt. And you can develop games however you want. If you know what you're doing, it's basically simple. You just define a goal. You define certain constraints, like don't do this, don't do that. But the important thing is I always want to work with a task. So it's not like I tell my students, do this. I don't say them at all what they should do. I tell them, solve this problem. Mm-hmm. And how you solve this problem, actually, I don't care. But the trick is the constraints of the task or the game are set so they will do the right stuff, right? Mm. So that's a bit tricky. It's like the goal is to get them somewhere to do something, but you're not allowed to tell them how. Yeah. So you have to design games and stuff which forces a certain behavior after some time, but the point is they themselves felt acted, and they made decisions, and they gained experiences because they acted and perceived, and it's not like the coach showed me, right? Mm. And that's more like a guided approach when I have something in mind, like back control, for example. But actually, you can also do. Sometimes you don't even need that. So, for example, how I teach a wrestling stance, right, is I felt like if you want somebody to teach him footwork or stance, and you tell them, yeah, you stand with this foot in front and with this width, and you bend a little bit, but not too much, and then your arms should be like this. And a thing like stance can get really, really, really complicated really, really quickly, because a new student has to think about all this stuff. So what I like to do, I like to let them play a game, and the game is really simple. It's like you have to touch the knees of the other guy. So if you would do that, only this rule and this goal, so touching the knees of the other guy and defending, then obviously people would stand really, really, really bent forward, and that's actually what happens. If you try that, if you play this game, people will stand really bent forward. So I introduced another rule, and I said, okay, so if the hands or anything but the soles of your feet touch the ground, you always you lose a point. So if you make the other guy touch the ground with anything but his feet, you get a point. So and when you add these two rules, you actually realize people will automatically have a certain stance, which gives them mobility because they have to defend people tapping their knees. But it also fixes the bent posture, because if they bend too much, well, people just snap you down and your hands touch the floor, right? Or your knees. And what I really realized is that with this game, I can teach a beginner who never did martial arts, maybe not a perfect, but a decent and functional stance in like 2 minutes. And they don't have to think about it. It's just like they had a task, they had a goal, and they self-regulated themselves to achieve that goal without much thought. It's just like, oh, fuck, he tapped my knee. I better do this now. Oh, fuck, I touched the floor. I better don't stand that bent forward and stuff like this. So it's nested in experiences, right? And I'm always amazed how fast I can teach a stance like this. It's mind-boggling.
Very interesting. So it sounds like it's a form of, say, just positional sparring, but not really, because like I think sometimes I myself will, if I teach a half guard pass, I'll make sure students, do some starting rounds in, from half guard. But I know even in that case, that's like a simplified version, because, sometimes they'll start there and then they won't ever be able to use the pass that was shown. So you're kind of focusing on like setting the right constraints and, making the right set of rules that the students will have that level of failure on to enable them to learn the moves or the techniques in a faster way. Is that kind of close?
Yes, that's close. I think like if you don't think so much about sparring or rolling, think about it like games, right? A game has rules and goals. So that's all you need. You need rules, you need goals. And if you actually use the term game, for some reason people automatically are more flowy. They aren't that tense, right? If you tell them, guys, we play a game, they just play. But if you tell them we do positional sparring now, people for some reason you can do the same stuff, but if you tell them it's sparring now, they will be a lot more tense and it will be more ego and stuff. So I feel like it's a little bit of gamification, right? And I think that's a really important part, because then people think like, yeah, I'm not working a competition situation. No, I'm just playing a game. Yeah. And if I don't get a point, who cares, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. And just the gamification, making it enjoyable and playful. Because I'm thinking, say we show, passing or just opening close guard. It's one thing to, just put people in someone's guard and say, well, open their close guard. That's the rule of the sport, and open the guard and pass. But we know that that's very, very difficult for anyone to pull off against a completely 100% resisting opponent. It's going to be hard. With certain time, it might take minutes or, at least to actually pull that off. So I think that makes sense what you're saying, to figure out ways that we can reduce that, that bigger action, open guard and pass it, down into smaller little chunks. Would you say, like, work out the smaller parts of that, and then make games out of those? Is that?
I think the important thing is, like, I mean, we are coaches, so I hopefully know which stuff works and which doesn't. So it's not like I'm sitting there and I'm just like trying to. It's not like I just see what comes up. I always have stuff in mind prior, right? So I know what the behavior I want to see is. But I have to find ways to kind of trick people into that behavior. I don't tell them, I want you to do this. But I set the constraints in a way that they will automatically do it after some time, because it's the only 2 or 3 ways stuff actually works. So for example, one thing you can achieve that is by, like you said, making the task smaller and smaller and smaller. So if it's too abstract, it's like, for example, you start in half guard, no grips or anything, and you tell them, people sweep the other guy. That's like a fairly complex problem, right?
Yeah.
There are maybe 1,000.
And I think that's a pretty common way currently of doing it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But if you want people, and that's fine for advanced students, if you know half guard, that's fine, right? But if you want to teach half guard, let's say something I really focus on in half guard is I tell these people, okay, for example, you start with an underhook. You already have your hooks switched, like in the Coyote Guard from Lucas Leitch, right? And now the goal is to build up to a dogfight. Yeah, it's not a sweep. It's just almost too easy. It's like, I mean, you have an underhook, the knee twist or the hooks switched, so you just have to build up to a dogfight, and that's the goal. Is to build up to the dogfight. The rules are, well, you start in this position, and then people will actually succeed at it because it's not that complex anymore, and that's really important. People have to succeed a lot of times, but they also have to make some experience some failures. So it's a balance of the task shouldn't be too easy, but it shouldn't also be too hard. So, for example, if people get this, I can get them to building up to a dogfight. I do another game where they start in the dogfight, and I tell them, okay, now you guys both start in the dogfight. Now sweep the other guy or take his back, and the other person should defend or escape. Then we can do another game. For example, you start in half guard, and the game is, okay, the top and the bottom guy should pummel for underhooks. So it's just, if you get an underhook, you get a point. Start again. You get an underhook, you get a point. Start again. So it's like you can, this way, they can fight for a certain goal in 1 minute. I don't know how many times you can pummel an underhook in 1 minute. Maybe 5 times each, depending on how good you are. And then after people made all these games, so they made many experiences getting an underhook, switching the hook, building up to a dogfight. What do I do when I'm at the dogfight? If people have succeeded in these small tasks, then we can do positional sparring from half guard, because people actually they already had some complexity and some resistance, but in a way where they could handle the resistance and complexity because it wasn't overwhelming, right? And you can do that step by step, right? You don't have to go from I get an underhook to half guard sparring. So you can, what I like to do is I do many small parts, and then I take two parts together. For example, getting an underhook and switching the hooks for the knee twists, for the example of the Lucas Leitch guard. Then I do building to the dogfight and sweeping from the dogfight is a new sparring again. So you kind of jump things together again until the big picture arises. I don't know if you get what I mean.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. So I'm looking at it from the perspective of, positional sparring being common already, but this is, figuring out the ways what you're suggesting is more than just positional sparring. And it seems like it's, the ways to break it down. So there's even, the micro positions or the little micro battles, and building our way up from there.
Yeah, and the point is, for example, it's always still a task, right? I don't tell them, okay, I show you now how I build up from half guard to get to the dogfight, and I put my hand here, and then I make space, I push him forward so I can get my bottom knee out and stuff like. I don't. Yeah, maybe I give cues for some people who need some help, but it's not like I tell them mimic me. It's like that's your start, that's your end. Figure it out, right? And people will figure it out. If the task is small enough, people will figure it out. I can guarantee you. If they don't figure it out, it just means the task is still too complex. So you have to make it smaller.
That makes sense. So it's interesting. It really links with that building then of concepts, just through this chunking it down, this gamification and making it smaller. Because I mean, there has been discussion in the grappling community for a while, like what's better, technique or drilling or concepts. And it seems like you're putting forward the idea of it's not a binary choice. It's not drilling or concepts. There's this, another option of gamification.
Yes.
That kind of combines both of those elements together, where you're doing the reps of it, but you're doing the reps of the concepts in time.
Yes, I feel like this is like some buzzwords or sayings like this: repetition without repetition, right? Or like another really, really smart saying, I forgot who it said right now, is don't repeat the same solution again and again, but solve the same problem again and again. That's basically it. I feel like drilling in jiu-jitsu is more like, okay, here, this is the perfect form, right? It's like some guy with a black belt shows you the perfect technique, the perfect form of something, and then you try to mimic it and mimic it and mimic it until it looks exactly like that. And I think that's catastrophic. And also, that's not how wrestlers drill, right? Drilling in wrestling, for some reason, probably because it's a bit more dynamic on the feet, it's not that rigid. There's rarely, if wrestler drills, it's always a little bit more playfulness, a little bit more activity from your partner. It's not that fixed, I feel like. At least that's my experience. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, I get it. So yeah, that importance of making it playful and making it fun while getting those repetitions in of but the repetitions is just solving the same problem, not a set way to actually solve it. And it's interesting because that, I think people, like when you say it, it kind of, you can understand that makes a lot of sense. But I don't think there's many people out there who are, explicitly have come up with a set of games for grappling that is like these are all the little games that can be played. I think that's a very, unique way of looking at things with a lot of, a lot of avenues to explore.
Yeah, that's the point, because I actually want to encourage people not to mimic my stuff, because that's actually the thing I'm fighting against, right?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
I want to give people a sense like, okay, that's how I do stuff, because I have a different goal. And if you understand what I'm saying, you can come up with all kinds of games yourself, and even depending on the exact sport you do, right? If you train for IBJJF, it would be different games. If you train for MMA, it would be different games. But the point is, nest your learning in tasks and in games, and not in the wrong sense of perfection of a certain form, because I feel like this literally does not exist at all. And that's this much martial artsy thing in jiu-jitsu. I feel like it's like this really Zen-like or Far Eastern notion of the perfect form, and practicing the one kick 1,000 times, and all this kind of romantic view about martial arts. And if you take a look at a real fight, at a real match, at rowing, stuff is dirty, stuff is messy, but it's functional. It just works. And if you try to get perfect at one move, what I argue is that means you invest too much time in getting really, really, really good at a really, really specific thing, which means you probably suck at many, many, many things.
That's could be possible too. So that idea of then, the perfect form, if we want to, if we look at the top people in the sport, or, sometimes in MMA as well, like the names that come to mind for me is, like a George St. Pierre, Marcelo Garcia, or, any of John Danaher's students, really, is, these guys at the moment would probably, say, my gut feeling is that their technique is just, they're getting by with superior technique, or they're just, their techniques are that much better. I still, maybe that's just the way that, with the conventional way of thinking. But when we look at the results that they're currently getting, they're still the ones winning. So I guess the traditional way of thinking would be that, okay, well, they're the ones winning, we should copy their techniques that they're doing. If we still get a lot of success with that, what's the harm, you think, in taking that route?
So what you're saying is like, these guys master certain techniques, so why shouldn't we just focus on these techniques, right?
Yeah. Well, just copy the...
Yeah, I mean, there is some point to it, actually. Yeah, I don't, like I said, it's all tools. It's not like I say, I don't teach techniques because I only want intuition. That's not right. Because I feel like it really depends on many, 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 many things. For example, that's a really big criticism I have for the community, how they think about learning and coaching. For some reason, they always think that competitors are really, really good learners or teachers. And I personally, or professionals, because I personally feel like the goal is intuition. And if you train twice a day, 6 times a week, you will get this intuition no matter what you do. Let's take a look at some of these guys. They train obsessively for years and decades. Of course, they will be fucking awesome grapplers or fighters. Of course, that's not the point. The point is, like me, I have a lot of people. They work full time. They are lawyers. They are engineers. They train twice a week for 1.5 hours. They cannot get to that level of a GSP or Marcelo Garcia. Well, they don't get there anyways, but they don't get there with the same way people they learned it, right? Because they just, the sheer amount of sacrifice they made, the sheer amount of work they put in. What I'm arguing is, if you train twice a day, every day for 5 years, and you are not great at what you're doing, you must really suck.
Yeah.
So that's not my standard. My standard is like, how do I teach people who train twice a week for 2 hours?
Yep.
Because that's actually the hard problem of coaching, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, that's the majority of people are going to be in that situation.
Right. Yes.
Which is a good point. Most people don't end up competing. Most people are training for fun. So that I can see how that will then cater, if we're making those games and, those smaller making those smaller games and making it fun, that's actually going to cater to a wider audience. And then the competitors, if they want, can, you tailor it more to them if they have to go down a different path.
And the other thing is, like, I speak out of my ass, and maybe that's a bit arrogant to say, but some DVDs or instructions I watch of high level competitors, and I feel like, dude, you don't understand what you are talking about. And obviously this guy would wreck me. I mean, I'm a hobbyist also. This guy would kill me on the mat. But not because he understands the biomechanics, the concepts, the principles better. Not because he's a better teacher. Not because he's a better learner. Because he made a sacrifice I did not make. The sacrifice was training full-time every day and sacrificing a lot of things many people are not willing to sacrifice. And I think we always have to keep that in mind, that a big part of getting good at anything, that's what I was arguing with the intuition anyways, it's just your experience, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I've had the thoughts before that, obviously the people training, at Danaher's would probably, if they're training full time, they're probably just as good if they go under, any of the other top coaches, if they're that committed. And I mean, there's probably some people, I think, in everyone's gym where you just think, well, okay, this person will probably be good no matter where they go, because they've got that commitment to training, and they're putting in the hours, and they're going to be good no matter who they're training under. And I guess then that makes sense, that they've learned not so much to be able to repeat those techniques or concepts or principles, but they've just learned through hours and just that repetition of solving problems and failing to solve problems.
I mean, just think about it. If the average class, let's say, let's just simplify stuff, is 1 hour technique drills and repetition, 1 hour rolling. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if we just assume that these guys learn nothing, if we're in the first part of technique drilling, if they train twice a day, 6 times a week, they still have 12 hours of rolling every week. That's the amount of rolling that a hobbyist maybe gets in a month or so, right? Mm-hmm. So we should not value the way these guys train. Obviously, not all of them. I know for a fact that many coaches out there are doing good work, right? It's not like I'm not saying, yeah, I have figured it out and the community sucks. I'm saying what I see is that many people do it kind of wrong, but some still do a good job, obviously. For example, I listen to a lot of podcasts of Damien Meyer lately, and actually it seems like he's doing stuff fairly common to how I do it. And he actually said in a podcast, I think it was, I don't remember the podcast it was, but he actually said the way he teaches now is completely different how he learned, and he uses a lot more of the stuff I'm talking about, a little bit more mini positional sparring, playful gaming, stuff like this. And that I thought like was really, really interesting. Like the guy who many argue is the greatest grappling MMA, who obviously achieved this point by the way he trained, argues that he doesn't teach the way he learned it in the beginning, right?
And I think that's the area of interest that a few people are talking about and is coming to the forefront, because it is this like a change from how everyone was taught, which my gut feeling is that I guess how jiu-jitsu was originally taught was really, people were keeping secrets, and it was still, this secretive arms race, I'll show you this, but don't show this. This is the secret move. And that's, from that martial arts background, I think, where, the idea is you just have to have the secret weapon, and then
right. It's like this notion that the master or the sensei, he knows something you don't know, and I feel like this is just plain false. Like if you take a look at great musicians, they just have so much experience. They played so many years. They just act intuitively. They just have the skill. It's not like they have a trick in their sleeve, right? It's just it's embodied in their being. It's like they care so much. It's just part of who they are. And I think like it's important that we have to realize if we, our students, want to achieve this kind of mastery, we all have to learn that it's not about knowing a certain thing. It's just about immersing ourselves in the task, getting familiar with all the situations that arise again and again, experiencing it over and over again until we get a kind of embodied sense of the situation, right?
That makes I love the comparison with music, because I was thinking then it's kind of like when people start jamming in a band, and they can just, you've seen when they're a solo ends or something, and you can, the guitarist will just look at the drummer, and they have that connection of just putting in the hours, being able to sense, just know and sense what's going on.
Yeah, and the goal basically is, like I said, people like Damien Meyer, Marcelo Garcia, Gordon Ryan, all these people, they have the experience because they train so much, obviously. And probably, I don't know, but I guess the training at the Blue Basement of Danaher is also very good. So the combination of good training and experience, of course, they are really good.
Yeah.
People who are 99% of the jiu-jitsu community are not people who train all the time. It's like, how do I get this? How do I increase the experience they get? How do I find how do I find a way so they don't have to practice for 10 years straight until they are somehow competent? Can I increase all this? And that's what I'm trying to do. It's not like I'm trying to skip stuff. It's not like I'm saying, yeah, I just have to teach the right techniques. No, I'm saying it's a process. They have to get the experience. They have to develop a sense of situations. They have to get intuition. but how can I speed it up a little bit? How can I make these experiences a bit more powerful, or maybe how can I get more experiences in a certain time frame, or maybe how can I give them the right experiences, right? It's like I feel like I'm an experience dealer. I give them experiences which help them to get better, and I maybe somehow can guide their learning by designing a practice which gives them more experiences and the right experiences, so they can learn faster. But there's no shortcut.
Yeah. Yes. Certainly, still no shortcuts. But I agree with what you're saying in that. If we go to the concepts versus drilling debate that happened, I was always thinking, well, if you have someone who trains twice a week and just a regular person as a hobbyist, then drilling might be a more efficient use of time, and that just get some reps in. Here's some of the basic foundational moves. Just rep it out. Use your 2 hours a week in the most efficient time, in the most efficient way. But I think it makes sense that breaking just that drilling down even further to that, not drilling techniques, but drilling and repeating those experiences.
Yes.
Makes a lot of sense to how people can progress.
And another thing I think it's really important is it's not like a master, and that's a word I use a lot because that's what I'm interested in, right? Mastery and of any kind, because you can actually learn a lot about mastery in combat sports if you take a look at mastery in music or whatever. It's like not everything you do is intuitive, right? There's still situations maybe where you experience something new, where you have to rely on these concepts or principles or heuristics. Or maybe if you are in a match or in a fight, there are strategic and tactical elements you have to think about. So what intuition also does is it frees up your mind. If you don't have to think about the stuff you do all the time, then you have more time to think about the more maybe not more important, but the stuff that is special to the situation, the strategy, the tactics. Maybe a problem arises you're not familiar with, so you can think about your heuristic or your rule of thumb, and that's why I still teach them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that way of thinking about that intuition. So you're not spending that time thinking. That's what another joke I've made in the past of while you're thinking, say someone's thinking about a concept, well, too late. I've already hit the move that I've drilled 1,000 times. But if it's an intuitive thing, then that makes sense that you don't, you're not thinking about a concept or a principle. It's just, it's within you.
Yeah. And I mean, just I'm always really, I found it somewhat weird how far philosophy and science, and I say that as someone who studied both, drifted away from everyday life, right? People cannot relate to a lot of these things. And that's what I'm saying is just think about what you do every day. The stuff I'm talking about, you experience from the moment you wake up. If you drive in a car, driving a car, I mean, in Germany, everybody drives with gear, right? So it's not you have to do a lot of stuff. You have to shift the gears. You have to look at the traffic. You do all the stuff. It's incredibly complex, but you don't do it by consciously thinking about it. And if you would probably do a crash, because you drive the car, you don't think about it, you do everything right, you listen to music, you talk maybe to your wife who's sitting next to you, and you do all the stuff without much conscious thought. It's not like a new thing. This is the natural mode of how most people do most of the things they do in life. And for example, if I'm a scientist, if I work scientifically, that's not that's a really small part of my life. It's a method, it's a tool, it's a technique. It's not what being a human is really about. We're not robots. We're not like this is my perfect system algorithm. It's like, no, we mostly act intuitively with almost everything we do.
And it makes sense that changing the training from an arms race or collection of techniques to just that inbuilt experience and more time for intuition. I think that's a very interesting way of looking at things, Andy, and I think we can explore that a lot more into the future. I think there's a lot of room to discuss this even further. But it's been a fascinating conversation. Is there anything you'd like to finish up on that we haven't touched on?
Yeah, of course. I feel like what we didn't touch today, but maybe we'll do at another time if you like, is this whole notion of systems and system thinking. Because what I don't want people to think is like, this guy doesn't teach any systems. This guy doesn't teach any techniques, and that would be wrong. I just feel like the overall goal for me is not to teach a technique or a certain system. I still use them, and actually systems are the other thing I'm really interested about. It's the one thing is always intuition and mastery stuff. The other thing is systems. So I still use them. I can already say so much. It's not all intuitive I do, but a lot of things.
Beautiful. Well, if you'd be happy to come back on, we do a part 2. I think that's a perfect lead in to have another discussion about systems, because we've had a great discussion there about intuition.
For sure. Sounds fun.
Excellent. Just finishing up, is there anything you would like to, or just mention how people can get in touch with you, or how they can follow you? And I know you've got a couple of projects in the works you might want to mention.
So obviously my name is Andy. My tag on Instagram is @SchoolofGrappling. I mostly do stuff there. I have a Twitter account, but I don't really get Twitter. It's not for me, so I basically just use it to share some interesting links, since you cannot share links on Instagram, which is really bad. And I also have a homepage, schoolofgrappling.com, where it's more like in addition to the stuff I write on Instagram, where I can maybe be a bit more in depth, write bigger articles, embed some videos and stuff. And I will probably do more in the future on my homepage. Yeah. And the next projects, just you will see.
You will see. Well, hopefully everyone's interested now after.
I can already tell you that I feel like the ADCC studies I have done, right now I'm not that interested in jiu-jitsu or doing statistics for jiu-jitsu, so I'm currently focusing a lot on grappling and MMA.
Okay, because that was something else that you've done a lot of with work on statistics, and maybe we'll save that discussion for next time as well. And
maybe we can do a third podcast,
a third one as well. Yeah, I'd love to. It's been very insightful conversation, because I really feel like this is something that it's pushing boundaries in that there's a lot more to develop, because as you said, it's not the way things have generally been taught in the martial arts as a whole. So it opens up a lot of room for development, and that's exciting. So yeah, I thank you very much for having this discussion, and we will. I'll make sure that we will chat again about systems. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for listening. See ya.
And that concludes this episode of the Sonny Brown Breakdown. Please leave a review of the iTunes store and check out sonnybrown.net to links to all my social media. Thanks.